everyone. We'll just give folks one more minute to log on and then we'll get started.
So as folks are joining in, I think we can start since we have a robust conversation planned. I know the numbers are increasing, but I just wanted to first say good afternoon. My name is Nadia Villagran. I'm the Interim Director of Rural LISC and also coordinate our fund development and strategic partnerships for the rural team. And I'm here today to welcome you. Rural LISC works with and through approximately 150 partners, transforming rural communities across more than 2,400 counties. And we started this series, Raise the Roof, to help identify housing-related topics that are of importance to rural communities across the country. And this is the first of 2024. And so we welcome you all being here. I understand we may break the internet here with almost 500 registered attendees, which is a max for our Zoom account. So we are recording this for those of you who have any technical issues or know of folks who want to get in and there's some trouble. So keep in mind, we will be recording this, but I'm just here to thank you all for joining us. And then I'm going to invite Keegan to share a little bit more about the topic on hand. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nadia, and thanks everyone for being here. Really excited about this webinar today. Here at Rural LISC, we try and advance locally driven solutions to housing affordability and other socioeconomic challenges that our partners face in communities across the country. And the issue and challenge with heirs property, that is family-owned properties inherited through generations or passed on to recipients without a formal legal proceedings to prove ownership. We've heard that this causes challenges in many communities across the country. So we wanted to bring together some experts, researchers, community practitioners to share some solutions and some innovative research findings on the topic. So today's speakers, really excited for them to share some of their expertise with you. We have experts here from Housing Assistance Council, Community Legal Services, and some of my great colleagues here at LISC. Just some quick housekeeping. All the webinar attendees have been muted. However, we welcome your thoughts, reactions, questions in the chat and in the Q&A function. We'll start with some presentations, but please put any questions you have in the Q&A and we will do a moderated session after the presentation. So first speaker today is Natasha Moody, Research Associate at the Housing Assistance Council, also known as HAC. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Keegan and Nadia, for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm really grateful. As Keegan said, my name is Natasha Moody. I'm a research associate at the Housing Assistance Council, and I was honored to work on this research with my colleague, Dr. Keith Wiley, and our research director, Lance George, in collaboration with Fannie Mae. Next slide, please. The Housing Assistance Council is a national nonprofit organization that supports affordable housing and community development across rural America. For over 50 years, HAC, as we're known as, has supported rural communities through research, training and technical assistance, lending, and policy advocacy. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with a little background around heirs property for those who may be unfamiliar. As Keegan mentioned, heirs property, they're created when a property owner dies without a will or another form of estate planning. When this happens, the property is transferred to their descendants as an undivided interest and undivided property. When they all have equal claim to the property, no one owner can demonstrate clear title and clear ownership with a deed or a title. The longer the property is in the state, the more generations will inherit the property in this way, and the title becomes more tangled over time. For our research, we also included other forms of tangled titles, where property owners may choose to leave their land to multiple descendants in a will, but for a variety of reasons, the property is not completed probate or the state required formal transfer of a title. Property owners may choose this form of intentional familial land control due to cultural and kinship ties to land, or as a defense mechanism against homelessness for future generations. However, without completing the formal transfer of the title, over generations, the ownership becomes more tangled and they'll face similar issues. Next slide, please. Being an heirs property owner can present many complications in the current legal and housing system. Clear property titles are required to sell the property at market value, to access loans that require lien on the property, which includes loans for home construction or repair, and to access property insurance and full property tax exemptions in many states. Property owners also cannot access federal grants for housing repair or construction. For example, USDA has a single-family housing repair loan and grants program that requires both the evidence of ownership and the evidence of property insurance, both of which would be a barrier and a challenge for many heirs property owners. We've also seen examples of this with community infrastructure monies, where communities had federal grants for infrastructure, but the properties in the designated areas had tangled titles, which inhibited the process of these projects. With the major infrastructure monies being invested right now across the country, we may see situations where regions that need this money the most may not be able to take advantage of the opportunity because the land is inaccessible due to title issues. Not being able to participate in the market or access financing for loans can lead to decreased agency for heirs property owners who would like to sell their property at market rate or construct the housing of their choice. Having a tangled title leaves owners vulnerable to forced sale from developers or other entities, or losing it to tax sale or mortgage foreclosure. When multiple people have claim to the property, there may be miscommunication around who's responsible for upkeeping those finances and could lead to being vulnerable to land and property loss. Heirs properties tend to exist in clusters. And in some cases, due to not being able to access the needed financing or being able to sell the property, there can be concentrations of dilapidated housing or vacant lots. And the impacts of this affect the community as well, potentially leading to decreased population, decreased tax base, and fewer community amenities, all of which affect the values of the homes in the area and generational wealth for the families and the communities. Next slide, please. Heirs property and associated issues were created by systems of exclusion and racism. Many of those barriers perpetuate these issues today. Communities, particularly Black and Indigenous communities, were excluded and exploited by homeownership systems, including financial and legal systems, resulting in land theft and land loss. Due to generations of harm, in some communities, there's a lingering distrust and hesitation in engaging with the legal and financial systems. Part of the exclusion and hesitancy is due to the lack of cultural inclusivity in the legal and financial systems. The systems currently do not accommodate families that would like to choose a form of communal or familial ownership of the land. And there's at times shortage of professionals trained in engaging in estate planning with communities, where speaking about death in the estate planning process may be an uncomfortable and uncommon occurrence. In some rural communities, there are legal and financial deserts where they're not able to access the help that they need. In cases where families may have left the property to multiple descendants in a will, but have not completed the probate process or the formal transfer of the title, it could be due to many factors, including financial constraints. In areas where legal aid is not available, it can be a costly process. Sometimes there are familial issues preventing resolution. At times, there are generations, after generations of having to navigate barriers in the housing and legal finance systems, the generational knowledge being passed down regarding inheriting property may not align with the current state requirements. And then again, with there being legal and financial deserts, that can be barriers to completing the probate or the formal transfer of the title process, particularly in rural communities. Next slide, please. The Housing Assistance Council, in collaboration with Fannie Mae, used tax and assessment data to estimate the prevalence of residential heirs property. In collaboration with Fannie Mae's enterprise data team, we developed a methodology that suited the data set. We aimed to identify properties that were likely currently heirs properties and properties that are at risk of soon becoming heirs properties. We identified properties by identifying indicators that showed that property was owned by multiple real persons with no indication of a formal transfer of title upon the death of an owner. We also identified properties with characteristics that may indicate a lack of a title. Some of the goals of this research including estimating a baseline of heirs properties across the nation and creating a reproducible methodology for our partners who are seeking to estimate heirs properties in their regions. Next slide, please. When we were conducting our analysis, we noticed that our methodology was identifying some states with significant housing issues, but not pulling out and identifying heirs properties. After noticing this, we implemented a standard correction, resulting in our analysis being conducted on 44 states and the District of Columbia. We will conduct analysis on the omitted states later this year, but for the results I'm going to discuss today, that's on 44 states and the District of Columbia. We estimated that 0.5% of all residential properties in the database were identified as heirs property, and the total assessed value for all the identified properties was $32.3 billion. And we know this is a conservative estimate. Next slide, please. We mapped the prevalence by county, and we want to note that this map demonstrates the relative prevalence of heirs properties, residential heirs properties, based on electronic tax and assessment data that were available. Counties that may not be highlighted in this map may be due to the paper, like having physical records of deeds and assessments, or there may be specific and unique local identifiers, which in a regional analysis can be added to this baseline to identify additional properties. This is not to state that areas that are not highlighted in this study do not have these issues of heirs property. There may just need to be additional analysis on those regions. And so here in this map, you can see that based on our methodology and database, the lower prevalences is in the yellow and the higher prevalences go up to the dark blue. And the omitted states are in gray, as I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Persistent poverty counties are counties with a poverty rate of 20% or higher over 3 decades. We found that persistent poverty counties had a higher prevalence of heirs property with a prevalence of 1.2% of residential properties compared to all counties. If you could return to the previous slide for me, please, real quick with the persistent poverty. Thank you so much. So persistent poverty had a higher, had a higher prevalence with 1.2% of all residential properties compared to other counties with a rate of 0.6%. This aligns with the research and understanding that heirs property issues do not exist in a vacuum. Other issues of systemic disinvestment impact regions with concentrations of heirs property. Next slide, please. 65% of identified heirs properties were located in rural census tracts. The data and methodology are more aligned with identifying single-family detached homes and only recorded residential properties with built structures. So this may result in an undercount in urban areas. Issues of heirs property impact all geographies, and a county-level analysis may not fully capture the disparate effects of heirs property in communities, particularly communities of color in urban areas. Next slide, please. The estimates of this research are conservative. We aim to present this is really a minimum number of prevalence of heirs property due to data variability and availability. The data focused solely on residential properties as coded by the local assessors. This study did not include vacant parcels or agricultural land, which are very prevalent in some communities and have concentrations of heirs property. So further regional analysis is needed as data availability and assessment practices do vary state by state, county by county, and sometimes individual assessor by individual assessor. Next slide, please. So the Housing Assistance Council in partnership with Fannie Mae will continue regionally focused quantitative and qualitative research. Collaboration between the housing and community development fields with legal firms, government, academia, agriculture, are really needed. This collaborative approach is needed in this work to resolve heirs property. While we are also investigating housing policy and housing finance and seeing how systems can be more inclusive and supportive of both current and former heirs property owners. Next slide, please. And there are many benefits to addressing the issue of heirs property for families and communities, including increased agency for owners, increased land tenure and retention, a defense against homelessness, and community preservation, just to name a few. The presence of heirs property, while being a result of systemic design, really are a testament to the resiliency of some of these households, in some case acquiring property despite facing many barriers and fighting to preserve the property over many generations, sometimes hundreds of years. So the continued work to address these issues, including the work of our panelists here, Darlene, Christopher, Jonathan, and many others, will really continue to aid in the movement towards closing the racial wealth gap and preserving generational wealth for many impacted households. So thank you so much for having me. I will now pass it to Darlene.
Thanks so much, Natasha. I will present the attorneys look at how we deal with heirs property. And so we can go to the community legal services. There you are. So I call it community lawyering because what I do when I'm dealing with heirs property and what the attorneys do is we really are in the community, seeking to assist clients within the community with the various issues that Natasha mentioned early, and I'll go through those with you. But I do want to thank Rural LISC for inviting me, Natasha and Keegan and Nadia and Christopher. I also want to thank my FAMU Eatonville Heirs Property Fellow, LaToya Walker, who also assisted with this presentation. Next slide, please. So being an attorney in the community, navigating heirs property issues, we have several different reasons why we're there, but we want to navigate and resolve legal issues related to heirs property. We also help families find and use resources to position the property in a way to leverage and maximize heirs property and add value to the generational wealth. When we talk about generational wealth, having the land is already generational wealth, but we also want to add value to that. When you're a community attorney, you have to know the people in the community, you have to know the culture, and you have to know the history. Next slide, please. So Natasha actually spoke about resolving the legal issues, and I want to talk to you on just a little bit about how those show up from clients in the heirs property space. So she mentioned probate, and we also have partition, which is a way to the courts can divide property amongst several owners that own one piece of property. And in Florida, we have adopted the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act. It's Florida Statute 64.201 through 64.214. And that's an important act that Florida adopted in 2020 because previously, if there were tenants in common that owned property, we had people who weren't really interested in preserving their property, but they would go and they would, I would say, poach off one of the tenants in commons share, and then they would force the sale of the home. With the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, that has lessened because it provides additional protections to family members when someone's seeking to partition the home. Also, issues come up post-disaster. When there's a disaster, like Natasha mentioned, there are several instances where you won't be able to, where heirs, property owners won't be able to take advantage of the FEMA money or other disaster aid that is provided. And then, although FEMA has changed their eligibility requirements, there are certain programs out there that if you don't have the homestead, if you don't have homestead exemption, you won't be able to take advantage of those. So also eviction. Sometimes we get families squabbling about and throwing other family members out of the home. And so we get cases like that. We get cases regarding property taxes. Deed preparation. There are some family members who want to not be involved with probate. And so part of our work that we're doing is estate planning and helping people to plan better to avoid heirs property. And we also may run into problems with title issues. Next slide, please. So as an attorney dealing with heirs property, while we are going through the probate, which can take months or sometimes years, depending on the situation. We have family members doing a little homework, and I wanted to share that with you so you're getting kind of like a view of what families have to do or should be doing while they are dealing with an heirs property issue that's in court. First, even before we file a case in court, family members have to locate all the family members that are heirs to the property. And sometimes that means mapping out who the heirs are. Sometimes that means, getting their names or contact information and providing that information to the attorney. As an attorney, I always recommend that the family gets together because most times family members haven't spoken to each other in years. There's various family dynamics that are going on where they don't want to talk to each other, or there's property experience. We encourage families to get together either by Zoom or in person, get to know each other, share resources, create a vision for the property, create a maintenance plan for the property, whether it be a legacy plan and a financial plan. And this plan should include estate planning for family members. Also, we ask families to locate and follow up with various resources, whether they be local, state, federal resources to rehab the property. Sometimes we deal with forestry experts and surveyors. We also have communication with the tax collector's office and the property appraiser's office, so that if payment plans need to be made for the families, we can try to resolve issues like that. But this type of work takes a lot, and it takes a lot of other resources like Rural LISC, like HAC. We are all working in conjunction. Although this problem has been around for a long time, heirs property has been around for a long time, the focus that has been placed on it in the last several years is laudable. We have a long way to go, but in terms of policy, laws, and just coming together as stakeholders to help resolve these issues in communities. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk a little bit about how Community Legal Service built its heirs property initiative, because it takes a long time, it takes work, and it takes focus. So we solidified our partnerships. We partnered with Help CDC, which is a HUD certified housing provider, and FAMU Law School. The law students actually mapped one of the towns for us and told us how much, were able to let us know how many properties were probably heirs properties or more likely to be heirs property, and it's very helpful information. And the law fellows also help with the cases. They help do research, and so they're a valuable asset to this particular program. And we also have connected families with services that help with family dynamics. So we also did outreach. We attend, sponsor, support, invest in communities. We meet with local representatives, community education workshops. We do them live and virtual. We've communicated and have resources such as the local library, the community center, the churches, the chambers. And also, I always talk about the center of knowledge, and that is the person in the community that knows everyone, that has all the resources, that can point you in the right direction. That person or people, they're very important in the community to help you ensure that working in the community, you're following the culture and that you are assisting in the best way possible. And we also have, as attorneys, created our own ecosystem, meaning we've searched out for resources to help us in our work for our clients. That's how all of us are on this call. We're working together because heirs property is a huge problem, but it takes all of us. So we attend conferences and we engage with a network of attorney practitioners, actually. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to talk briefly about an initiative, the Public Interest Heirs Property Attorneys Initiative. In the state of Florida, several of attorneys at at legal services have come together because we realize the vastness of this issue. So in order to share resources, knowledge, all of us have come together and we cover 57 of the 67 counties. They're listed here: Bay Area Legal, Community Legal Services, and Community Legal Services covers 12 counties. Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach County, Legal Services of Greater Miami, Legal Services of North Florida, and Three Rivers Legal Services. All of these legal services offer no-cost civil advocacy for the most vulnerable in our community. Yes, we may be different in maybe our eligibility or maybe our how we do our intakes or things like that, but we're all on the same page when it comes to providing information and serving our residents regarding heirs property. So what I'm going to do, I have a few slides here so if anyone wants to take a picture of the legal aids that provide services, please see the next few slides. So again, we have Community Legal Services. There's my information there. Legal Services of North Florida. Next slide. Three Rivers Legal Services, Bay Area Legal Services. Next slide. Legal Services of Greater Miami, Legal Aid Society of Palm Beach. And so again, if you know anyone that needs free legal services or legal services at no cost regarding heirs property or any of those issues that I mentioned, please give us a call. In closing, I want to say that for stakeholders in this heirs property community, again, we're all working together. It's important for us to create holistic programs to support heirs property clients and practitioners, meaning legal outreach, policy changes. We have to streamline and share resources by state and by county. We need to continue to create strategic and collaborative partnerships to maximize resources for our families, meaning community programs, national heirs practitioner networks, state and local associations, and other public interest firms. We all have to come together to help in this, help to eradicate heirs property. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Christopher Smith. Christopher is our Community Development Program Officer at LISC Jacksonville. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Darlene. And it's a pleasure to be with y'all this afternoon. And I'll just go through a few slides. I'm going to react to what I've heard too. So first reaction is Darlene and Natasha both touched on it. One is the importance of bringing together housing resources and legal services, right? The ability to bridge those two to help provide real-time support for folks who are most vulnerable is critical. And so that's one thing I want to make sure that's clear. The way we've looked at that is leveraging existing housing counseling agencies. So you've got housing counseling agencies on the ground that are doing work with vulnerable households. I'd encourage you to think about how to integrate heirs property information, estate planning, which is on the prevention side. How do you leverage those existing networks to help spread the word? So one of the keys I would make known here is what role can you play? Help spread the word, help it with awareness and education. Folks can learn more about this complicated issue. You can help break it down into manageable bites so that folks are willing and confident to take action. This slide you're seeing sort of is our standard sort of approach. It builds on the order of this presentation, right? Data, identify neighborhoods, and/or target areas. So another message, this issue cuts through rural, suburban, and urban areas. Hard stop. Everybody's facing this. We are all in one big bed on this one, okay? And there are lessons and sort of insights that can be shared. And I think that's part of what Keegan and Nadia were getting at today. And so I'm in Jacksonville, Florida, and I see both the urban central sort of neighborhoods and the impact it's having there, but it quickly shows up in our outer suburban neighborhoods and our rural counties that are part of our MSA. And so when we do a conversation with community, and you can go to the next slide, folks can read that and get a feel for our process. When we have a community meeting, one of the things that often comes up is, well, who's having calls or getting information from people who want to buy their house or buy their land? Every hand usually goes up. So the point here is that the more informed community and households are, the better they can make decisions about their financial future. Oftentimes, we're asking households to come together to make a financial decision at their most vulnerable time. And so information is critical. And to bring it through use of credible, trusted messengers, which is part of this slide you're seeing here. This is part of our secret sauce. It is an ecosystem approach. We think all four of these areas are critical to work in tandem, right? And in connection. So you've got comms up at the top. Then you've got research to the left, infrastructure, and then community organizing. Let me tell you right now, community organizing, without that one, we're not going to be successful. And so there has to be trusted messengers who understand the issue and can bring a charisma to the topic and help disentangle the jargon and into ways in which people can see themselves taking action, okay? So we've got a role as LISC. So for my LISC colleagues, what role can you play? One is you convene the folks in this ecosystem to talk about what the challenge looks like. Two, you can come together around some aligned actions that you can take, whether that be in alignment with housing counseling, with legal services, with your property appraiser or other public sector actors. You can all come together around where can I show up and take action around this work. And then frankly, without Natasha and the research, it's difficult to be efficient. You need the research and the data, folks, in order to be surgical about identifying the folks that are most vulnerable. There are three questions that drive our work. You can go to the next slide. Three questions. First, who are the folks most vulnerable in the community? Second, where are the folks with bad title? Third, who owns the neighborhood? Those three questions drive some of our data gathering, data collection, so that we're able then to take some of those initial answers. And I'm going to say this as well. We just need to be good enough with the data. It doesn't need to be totally precise. It needs to be directional so that we can begin to take action and begin to move resources and align efforts in a way that helps generate momentum. How do we get the momentum? We got to have trust, and that comes from relationship building, okay? And we got to have speed. This is an area, folks, where I'm going to encourage you to articulate a sense of urgency, because the home loss and wealth loss is very much real. One way that I'm going to leave you today is with our own communications toolkit. I mentioned the importance of comms and the importance of trusted messengers. If you scan this QR code, you'll see the resources that have been developed alongside with our community partners that are able to message this in ways that stick, okay? We're looking for ways that we can make sure that the senior or the more mature homeowner and household gets the point that they need to understand this issue. We also want to make sure the point goes to the inheritor of a property who may be a grandson, a granddaughter, a daughter, a cousin, who are part of a family that has, unbeknownst to them, now face a issue that they need to deal with, okay? So yes, this is important to low to moderate income households, but it is also important to just about every demographic that you work with in your respective neighborhoods. And so again, the comms toolkit, you can go to the next slide. I think that's my last one. Oh, I got a couple more. Here's our strategies. You can see it's self-explanatory. We need Darlene, we need legal services to be out there doing cases. Our role is to generate referrals, create the pipeline for folks to be able to get the information they need so they can make the right decisions. Ways that we can prevent heirs property is by focusing in on folks right now who are in properties for 10, 20, 30 years, and they are thinking about, well, who am I going to pass this on to? Okay, and that mainly speaks to seniors. So one insight here was we developed a process we were able to data scrape households with senior exemptions and then share information with them about estate planning and generate their interest in what they could do to protect their home asset and keep that home asset in the family should they choose. Second strategy here I'll touch on briefly is property tax relief fund. I won't get into the exemption enrollment for today, but the property tax relief fund is important because a lot of folks are prone to or vulnerable to tax auction sale who are also likely heirs households. They're unable to take advantage of the full exemptions available to them in their respective municipality or state, such as homestead exemption. By having a higher tax on the home they're living in, they may be paying the light bill, they may be paying the taxes somewhat every year, but if they get in arrears, there's very little relief for folks who do not have homestead exemption. And so what I'm suggesting to you is we know that the folks that are losing homes by tax auction sale are likely heirs households. In Duval County, there is a total overlap, okay? And so the numbers, right? In 2022, 2023, and you can go to the next slide, only 3 out of 180 households that were likely heirs households were able to pay their taxes before the tax auction sale. Therefore, 177 households lost their home due to tax arrears. What can LISC do? We can be involved in helping households prevent the loss of their home by helping them develop a payment plan, or even in Duval County's case, we've actually redeemed tax certificates and done that on behalf of the household so that they are no longer prone to tax sale. What you're looking at now is an evaluation tool that's in development now. If you want to know how you're doing, this is part of the way we're organizing. And if you see outcomes, you see residents receiving outreach, referrals to legal services, intake cases open and closed. That's the way we're articulating our success. That's the way we're able to talk to funders and partners about how impact is able to be shown in a way that's bite-sized, that people can get their arms around. And so with that, I thank everyone for the time. And I think that was my last slide. You can go to the next one. The data, driven, culturally relevant outreach, critical as a lesson learned. We know unclear home ownership and ownership impacts home values. In other words, likely heirs households, home values are lower than folks who have clear title. And then what's the opportunity? Over the next 20 years, folks, we're going to see baby boomers transfer wealth. Some estimates are $6 to $8 trillion. How's that wealth being transferred? Primarily through land and homes. How do we help folks keep that asset in the family? We encourage and promote estate planning. And with that, thank you for your time.
All right. Well, thank you, Christopher. That was great. I am Jonathan Atkins Tazwell. I'm with LISC Virginia, and we are in the infancy stages of launching our Heirs property program, modeling some of our predecessors down in Jacksonville and some other programs around the country. And what we really wanted to talk about is the need for it in all of our communities, which have been highlighted today, but also what does it take and what are the steps to get to that program? And as you're thinking about launching a program, who should be at the table, and also who needs to be at the table when it comes to your government officials or even your local municipalities. Next slide. So number one, when launching our program, we really wanted to understand the need. The national numbers and also the local numbers have been skewed. This is a very new problem with old systems and issues. So really trying to understand what is the need, you may have to go to various sources, and we're thankful for Hatch to put together such a national a database, but we're also looking at our local level. So here in Virginia, we are really looking at the number of heirs properties, and they have identified in a recent study that about 55,000 heirs properties have been identified in the state of Virginia. That totals almost 500,000 acres, but also this is not a typo. The total land value that could be lost is around $8 billion, and that's just here of the properties that we know in Virginia. On the East Coast, we know that our housing stock is aging. Land has been passed down for generations, being some of the earlier settlements. And a lot of the deeds and paper and all those systems to track lands are also hindering some of the process as well. So we really know that when we're looking at these heirs property, there's probably more than what's being identified currently. I am located in the Richmond region, and so is LISC Virginia, where we have 2 offices in the Hampton Roads. But here in Central Virginia, working with our attorney's office at the city of Richmond, we know that on tax delinquent properties, that around 40% of all tax delinquent cases are wrapped up in some way in heirs property. We identified that around over 130 properties currently that are delinquent for more than 5 years, they owe around $2.2 million in back taxes. So when you're thinking about your program, what are the benefits? The benefits are that money is being lost, or it's being definitely taken away from the families, but it is a huge benefit to get your local municipalities involved when you talk about tax-based revenue. Next slide. Early in our development of our program, we really were trying to identify what are the major issues. And here in Virginia, I'm sure just like other counties and countries around the country, the separation of the land and then also the separation of the title leads to a lot of cloudy titles and also tangled titles in this region. Your family will have land, and because of Virginia's certain laws, there are partition laws, they are forced to divide and sometimes sell or divide just their portion when they're going for a tax sale or when they're trying to access the wealth in that out of that land. But then also, if there is a structure on a property without a will or a clear deed to transfer their ownership, the land or the structure of the home will actually stay with the grandfather, and then the land will actually be separated into the heirs property. Next slide. So when we were looking at our program, we really wanted to identify 5 key factors here in the state of Virginia. Number one, we needed to have legal services. Trying to navigate this program, navigate heirs property court, is a tedious, time-consuming process. So number one, of course, has been stated, legal services is also the number one factor for this program. But then also, it can be an expensive process, depending on how the family wants to deviate the land, depending on the value of the land. $8 billion, somebody's going to want some contribution for that process. So we wanted to have dedicated funding set aside for financial support for the homeowner. Also, stakeholders and community residents. Building capacity is something that LISC does very, very well, and there's other organizations on this call that do it very well as well. But like I said earlier, this is a new problem with old systems, and there's not a lot of attorneys or lawyers or programs that are established to address the coming need of heirs property issues. So it's important for us to have some type of education and stakeholder capacity building in our program. And then always looking at our local policies. We talked about partition law in Florida. That is a huge issue here in Virginia as well. But then also navigating tax sales. Virginia Code 58.1 3965 is our law, and it hinders the time, as we talked about the urgency, and it also hinders the number of people that may be on the land that everyone has to sign off when action wants to be taken on the land. So we know that policy and advocacy has to be an issue as well. And going back to a state level issue, but there's also local laws that are plagued in here as well. When you're talking about permitting offices or zoning allowances or variances, and definitely your special use zoning permits, the local laws have to align with any federal or state law that governs heirs property. So we're always going to be looking at advocacy and support for changes when it comes to heirs property mitigation. And then supporting local governments to get into the fight. Having programs is not enough, especially when land is usually tied up at the local level. You want to have your local community DHCD offices, your housing development offices on board when it comes to this fight. So we're always finding ways to collaborate with our local governments as well. Next slide. How we're going to go about setting our program, we first looked at our region, at who's already established and what resources we have currently. And through our research, we identified two main sources for structuring our program. And that's number one, which is Learn RVA, owned and operated by Carla Carter, which is a education program who leads into solutions for low wealth communities. That could be land education, that could be legal services and attorneys, but also attached to that program was a large network of pro bono legal services that is also led by Caitlin Cohen. And we have a large number of energy providers, land providers, and then also our local planning consultant firm, which is HD Advisors, all came together to really take time and build out how we want this program to be run. And what we came along with is not just providing services and case management to the family, but really diving into building that next generation of attorneys to handle this process. So a large portion of the program is going to be educating practitioners, lawyers, attorneys, and also just building our capacity here in Virginia to handle and tackle heirs property cases. Next slide. So in conclusion, when you're thinking about building, the benefits are 1,000 to 1. This is a multi-billion-dollar issue currently throughout the region. And as Christopher said, this is going to be a $68 trillion issue. So we would encourage everyone to investigate their local communities and figure out how you can start a heirs property program and some of the steps, because they are going to be different in every part of the community, but we want to encourage everyone to start that process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan, and all of the speakers. Amazing information. Folks are singing your praises in the chat, and we have a lot of great questions. So let's dive into some Q&A, and we may need to do a second webinar or send out some responses in writing because there's a lot of interest in this topic. So let's dive in, and let's start where you ended, Jonathan, which is around what folks can do in their communities. If they're not in Virginia, if they're not in Jacksonville, where would you all advise starting? If you're a family or a community-based organization who's encountering a lot of heirs property challenges, what advice would you give to folks in other parts of the country? Christopher, Darlene, Natasha, Jonathan, any of you feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I'll jump in since we're the newest program. As I stated earlier, when thinking about the program and talking about effectiveness, the process for navigating heirs is tied up in legal systems. So number one, identifying competent legal attorneys who will have a heart for this work, because it may take time. It may take time to identify as heirs in certain places, to clear the title, and sometimes they would have to go to court as well. So definitely identifying legal services throughout your region that are doing the work, but then also finding ways to identify the properties as well. Just because their property is delinquent or dilapidated or distressed, it may not have heirs property issues, but you want to make sure that when you contact the families, you're contacting them not from because they are very vulnerable. When you're in the heirs property, you're very vulnerable on who's going to contact you, because you could get you get approached very often, as Christopher said, to sell your property on pennies on a dollar and losing that family wealth. So having a credible law firm and also legal services is my first step.
That's a
Keith.
great point.
Oh, go ahead,
Arlene,
Christopher.
if you could please speak to, there's a lot of folks in the chat who I think have family properties with tangled titles in different parts of the country. So how could folks find a legal aid organization in their community?
Right, so that I'm not sure if they were able to capture that information that I provided for the various legal aids in Florida, but they can definitely reach out to me and I can direct them to a legal aid in the area. Many of the legal aids receive funding for this type of work, and so that's why we are able to offer the services at no cost. And again, we offer different services. However, you know, all of us deal with heirs property in some form or fashion. And if you're not in if you're not in Florida, still reach out to me, because I can still direct you to other legal aids in the country, and I'll be happy to do that.
No, Keegan.
I must say,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Christopher. No, I was going to finish by saying, Christopher, you mentioned a sense of urgency, and that is very important, because when people are behind on their taxes, they need to get them paid, but there's no quick way to do probate, at least in Florida. And so we have some administration that may not take as long, but still the process has to work. And so, yes, I do agree with you that that sense of urgency needs to be always at the forefront, because when a hurricane hits, you know, and you need your house fixed right then, you need FEMA money, you need some type of disaster assistance, and trying to untangle title, that is not the time to do it. So yes, there is a sense of, you know, create a sense of urgency for people who do have heirs property. And I think I saw in the chat too about, do we see people that are hesitant to engage the legal process? It's there. It's absolutely there. One of the things that I'm very careful about is making sure that I create and let clients know that there's that confidentiality for their cases. That's very important as an attorney. And we know in many communities, that's very important. Some people like for people to know their information and some people don't. And so we at Community Legal Services only provide referrals, even to our partners, with their consent. So in doing that and maintaining and making sure they understand the confidentiality, I think that it helps that hesitancy disappear. I'm done, Christopher.
So go ahead, chime in.
I think a couple of things. One, I would look at waiting lists and denials for home housing assistance programs. Most times you'll find that a number of folks have been denied due to lack of proof of ownership. So that's a good starting point, okay, with your local housing division, housing programs, and talk with them about what they're seeing. Second, I'd look at funeral home directors, mortuaries, folks in that industry. And I think you'll find folks more than likely willing to be communications and outreach partners. They'll be willing to share information because they're getting people at a time of need. And there is a opening there to talk to them about what the future might look like as they deal with their current crisis. The third, I think Darlene hit on it, which is this notion of disaster relief and disaster assistance type support in Florida, at least Northeast Florida. Over the last decade, there were over 1,200 households, Keegan, that were denied FEMA because they lacked proof of ownership. And so I think there's another sort of starting point. But at the end of the day, I think LISC, again, I'll emphasize this, LISC and other community quarterbacks can start by organizing convening around the topic. Find out what people know, who's doing what, and begin with the willing. and start there.
That's great advice. Thank you, Christopher. Natasha, let's start with you on this one. There's questions around geography. I think that map is really interesting, the different prevalence of heirs property in different communities. Did the research uncover what characteristics or demographics make an area more likely to have a higher prevalence of heirs properties?
Thanks, Keegan. So prior research and research in this field have suggested, I mean, it really grew out of the Southeast, focused on agriculture. That's kind of where the heirs property research focus started about 30 or so years ago, and it's continued to grow. And so I think a lot of the indicators that we use in the research may prioritize the Southeast region, just the history of Black farmland or concentration of historic Black communities, and the legacies of those and how they're connected to the systems that create and perpetuate heirs property. That's why you see a lot of concentrations in the Southeast. We at the Housing Assistance Council, in collaboration with Fannie Mae, will be doing some more regional analyses to see, what those state prevalences are. But I think I saw a question as well around why there may be difference between states. So each county has their own recordation systems and practices for assessment, how they assess properties and then how they record that data. So that varies by county and by state. And so that's one of the reasons why that we see those variations across states as well.
That's great. And maybe Jonathan, Darlene, Christopher, could you speak to some qualities within neighborhoods where you're seeing higher concentrations within the communities that you work in?
I haven't seen, too many variations. It's, in Florida, there's a conservative estimate of 119,000 to 130,000 parcels of heirs property in Florida. So that's something that we have not researched. Probably Christopher may be able to speak to that more. But for us, building the program and then now being able to take advantage of the research that Natasha and Christopher are presenting, it's going to be helpful.
And Keegan, what we're finding is some clues, some breadcrumbs, homes, pre-1950 homes, right? Homes built before 1950, homes with no transaction for at least 10 to 15 years, all right? Homes without any building permits, roof permits for the last 20 years or more, homes with senior exemptions, folks that are incumbent households, legacy residents and there's an overlay in the urban context with red line neighborhoods, okay? There's a strong prevalence of concentration of heirs households in formerly red line neighborhoods.
That's great, thank you. And final question for you all. You all mentioned the importance of policy, local policies, state policies. Is there any policy advocacy strategy you would recommend for folks or something that would be really important to help solve this issue at a more structural level?
I saw I was going to say, I saw in the chat where Christopher mentioned the ladybird deeds here in Florida. We are really exploring that, and although it's not recognized in the statute, and there's various ways people think about them, we're trying to really get people to understand them and utilize them more.
That's great, Natasha.
Yeah, there's a need for a funding source, Keegan, in particularly in the urban context. We need HUD to identify a mechanism by which it would support heirs property counseling, estate planning support, and outreach and education. Department of Ag has done a terrific job with this. That also needs to be expanded so that more folks can get this information faster. Absolutely.
Natasha, Jonathan, any final thoughts?
I was just going to add that HAC has a great policy team. There's a lot of policy advocacy work there, focused on rural mostly, but housing focused. And so there is a need for, as Christopher mentioned, an expansion to federal funding to be more inclusive of heirs property owners and having ability to support housing construction, housing rehabilitation, because that also impacts the household well-being, community well-being, and the wealth tied up in that land.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I will just echo the sentiment from earlier, just an overview definition of home ownership. Here in Virginia, people could be living and paying taxes on a home for 40 years that's been passed down, and they're still not the owner. So really looking at the national definition of home ownership and figuring out how we can streamline and definitely figure out how we can attach funding when you do not have home ownership clear title.
Exactly. Thank you. And to all of the individual families out there who are asking specific questions about their particular properties, just again, really recommend reaching out to your local legal aid organizations, community-based organizations that provide housing counseling and other social services. I think those are your best assets in your community to try and begin that process to untangle some of those particular challenges you're facing. So with that, speakers, Natasha, Christopher, Darlene, Jonathan, thank you all so much for sharing your expertise. To all the attendees, thank you for being here. We will share this recording and the slides with you all. It has the speaker's contact information, and we will do our best to answer some of these other questions offline. So thank you all. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and hope to see you at the next webinar. Take care.
Take care, everyone. Good job, Keegan, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.